I'm going to do a video today on ball joints, particularly lower ball joints, and how to verify if they are worn. Now here is a ball joint, and I've actually removed the rubber boot on it, which keeps the grease in the ball joint so that it can move around freely and not wear out. So what we're looking at here, I'm pointing towards the camera, is the stud of the ball joint. The nut goes on to here. The ball joint is secured into the steering knuckle, and then the nut comes on the bottom and secures the stud here to the lower part of the knuckle. If we look at this, we can actually see why they're called ball joints. Hopefully this one will move. I think it might be seized up from sitting around. Yeah, this should move freely, but I'll show you that on another steering knuckle here that I have in my vise. But if you look at the part of the ball joint in here that will be surrounded with grease, hopefully you can see that it's actually shaped like a ball. Hence the name ball joint. And it joins the steering knuckle to the lower control arm. So I'm going to go over here to steering knuckle I have in the vise and see if I can show this a little bit clearer here. So here's the lower ball joint, and the reason I'm going to cover verifying if a lower ball joint is worn is because I have a vehicle that has a worn lower ball joint that I can show you. So this is how it should move. That one's moving freely. Hopefully you can see that in the camera there. So the lower control arm will be connected here, and the ball joint will connect the lower control arm to the steering knuckle, this part here. On the upper part of the steering knuckle, there's an upper control arm with a ball joint that goes down in. I'll show you that in a minute. But here's our lower ball joint, and it will be go down inside of the steering knuckle, and a nut will come up here and tighten it to the lower control arm. And as you can see, as the vehicle moves up and down, here's the tire out on this side with the rim. This rotor will be spinning. The body of the car is on my side. So as this vehicle would be moving along the road and hitting bumps, this ball joint is going to be moving in and out like this, and that's what's eventually going to cause wear. And if you're driving on bumpy roads, rough roads a lot, or you have somebody who just doesn't want to slow down when they're hitting bumps, you're going to get a lot of worn out ball joints. Quickly, I advise getting a manual for your vehicle. They're usually about $30 in Canada, maintenance manual for your vehicle. And it will show you specifically for your vehicle how to check for a worn lower ball joint. And there's value in that because depending on what type of a vehicle you have and what type of configuration there is for this lower ball joint, the method for verifying it's worn can be a little different. And basically, just the quick and dirty reason is because this ball joint on some vehicles will come up from above. So you will feel a different type of movement for a ball joint that's worn inside here, and that's where they will wear. This shouldn't wear, this stud, because this should be tight. The movement is within the ball that's down in this part of the ball joint, and that's where you're going to be wanting to verify if it's worn or not. And I just want to show again the idea I'm talking about with the upper and lower control arm and how they connect together. So here would be the upper ball joint, again moving freely to keep this steering knuckle as it moves to keep the upper control arm connected. So the upper ball joint goes through here, and hopefully you can envision you're driving along the road. Again, vehicle is on my side. You hit a bump, this upper control arm is going up and down, the ball joint is keeping it connected. Now, some vehicles won't have an upper control arm. The strut will actually connect to the knuckle down here and go right up. But on this vehicle, if this came off, that was the design. And again, the idea would be down below the lower control arm and the ball joint connecting it here as the lower control arm moves. So to check for a worn lower ball joint, jack up your vehicle, support it safely. As you can see, this is jacked up. You're going to want to shake it vertically, being careful not to put your hand underneath this tire in case something catastrophic happened and it fell, and you want to have blocks or jack stands to secure it. So you're going to shake it like this. Now if you feel movement in the lower portion of the tire, then it could be a worn lower ball joint. I always give it a shake horizontally while I'm at this point too. Now here's the interesting part, and hopefully you can kind of see this. I'm putting a fair bit of pressure and moving this, but I don't actually feel any movement, and that is what can be very misleading about a ball joint being worn, because the suspension of the vehicle is putting pressure on the ball joints. So depending on how you check for them, you may not see it that way. Unlike, say for instance, a tie rod, and if you were checking for that, you would be moving it back and forth this way, and there's no pressure on a tie rod in once you've had the vehicle jacked up. So we'll go and I'll show you. I'll take this tire off, what I mean. Now I've removed the tire off this vehicle. You can see the rotor. Here's the strut I was talking about, and you can see on this vehicle, unlike the other one that I showed you in the garage there that I had in the vise, there is no upper control arm. The strut just connects to the steering knuckle right here, goes right up into upper wheel well in there. So just to give you a little bit of a bearing where we're at here, here's our tie rod end. I'm going to see if I can position the camera in such a way as to show you, and here is our lower ball joint. There's the rubber boot on it that I removed to show you the inner workings of it, and that's the boot that keeps the grease in the ball joint, and as it moves, the grease moves around with it. And a lot of times when they wear, this boot will deteriorate or get cut, the grease will come out of the ball joint, and it will wear out then due to friction. So, to verify if the ball joint is worn on this particular vehicle, what we gotta do, I'm really hoping this is going to be an angle that you can see this at. Here's our ball joint, lower control arm here, and there's the steering knuckle. On this vehicle, this bolt tightens up here on the stud part of the ball joint. Now I'm hoping this is going to come up out in the video, so what we got to do to check for wear is carefully put a pry bar in on the steering knuckle, being careful not to hit that rubber boot, because if the ball joint isn't worn, you'll damage that boot if you're prying on it. So I got a bar, hopefully you can see this, between the lower control arm here and the steering knuckle right there, but I'm keeping it away from that boot on the ball joint. And as I move this, oops, hopefully you can see that that ball joint is moving up and down. And there is wear. So that's how we check it on this vehicle. Now, the one that I showed you in the garage in the vise, that vehicle, the manual advised that what you have to do is actually put a jack or raise this lower control arm a couple of inches, and then do the same thing and pry it to check. And basically the reason for that is because the design on the vehicle that I showed in the garage, the ball joint is going this way, so that you're going to have to check for wear a little differently on that style of vehicle. And that's why I really advise just having the Haynes with the Chilton manual. Whereas in this vehicle, the ball joint is this way with the stud pointing up. So that basically is how to check for wear. I think I might try to get that camera in a little closer and show that again. So I think I caught it on the video what I'm trying to display here now. Hopefully you can see that movement. As I push down on the control arm, we can see that the ball joint moves up and down. It should be dragging down the steering knuckle with it as I apply pressure here, or just not moving. So that's indicating to us that it's worn inside the ball joint itself, right down in here, the part we discussed earlier. There's our rubber boot with the grease in it. And if we watch up here, that's the stud part of the ball joint coming through the steering knuckle right there where my finger is on. That isn't moving, which indicates that there's nothing loose here. The bolt is obviously nice and tight. It secures the steering knuckle to the lower control arm, or to the ball joint actually. So that there's no movement there. The movement is down here. That ball joint is worn inside.